Welcome to Canusa Street, a podcast at the intersection of the issues and policies between Canada and the United States. Here are your hosts, Beth Burke and Chris Sands.
Hello, and welcome back to Canusa Street. I'm Beth Burke with the Canadian American Business Council, joined by my wonderful, amazing co-host, Christopher Sands of the Woodrow Wilson Center. Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm great, Beth. The listeners can't see it, but I'm actually not wearing a tie. I wore a tie to one of our recent podcast recordings, and somebody said, "Who wears a tie to a podcast?" And I realized that. So I'm being casual today.
Well, good. I'm really excited about today's episode. We have a really special guest joining us. I am going to let you do the formal introduction, but I can't wait because we have actually been to Canada together, a little preview. So, Chris, why don't you go ahead?
Very exciting. I know we have Congressman Buddy Carter, who represents Georgia's 1st Congressional District. Representative Carter is a Republican serving in his 5th term in the United States House of Representatives. He's a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee and the House Budget Committee. So a lot of Canada-U.S. relations passes through his committees, that's for sure. He proudly serves as chairman of the E&C Subcommittee on Environment, Manufacturing, and Critical Minerals, where he prioritizes beating China, reducing emissions, unleashing American energy, and creating a pro-growth business environment. This is something I did not know, Congressman. As a pharmacist serving in Congress, Buddy's dedicated to working towards the healthcare system that provides more choices, less costs, better services. He's a lifelong resident of the 1st District, born and raised in Port Wentworth, Georgia. So, Congressman, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm excited about being with you. I appreciate the opportunity.
I'm so excited. As I sort of alluded in our intro here, we have spent some time together in Montreal last summer. Gosh, I can't believe how fast the time has gone. But I'm really excited to chat with you. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about there and that we've actually discussed since then is your important role in this U.S.-Canada relationship. You obviously, by the positions of your committee, have natural interactions, but you're also a proud member of the ACES caucus. And for our listeners who haven't heard me say this a million times, it's the American Canadian Economic Security Caucus. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how someone from Georgia, which in theory feels really far from the northern border, became such a key ally in this relationship.
Well, one of the reasons why is because trade is so important to us in Georgia. I represent the entire coast of Georgia, over 100 miles of pristine coastline. But more importantly, at least in this situation, is that we have 2 major seaports. The port of Savannah, which is the number 3 container port in the United States, the fastest growing container port in the United States, and also the port of Brunswick, which is the number 2 roll-on, roll-off in terms of vehicles, trucks and cars in the United States. So trade is extremely important to us. And of course, it's extremely important to my district, but extremely important to our state as well.
Congressman, I was going to ask you about the USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. We're looking at a busy couple of years. I was looking at the requirements. Congress is expecting to get a notification of the review attitude of the administration in 2025. And then you have the formal review in 2026. I know there's a big question mark because we don't know who the president's going to be. But from a congressional perspective, what are you thinking? Is USMCA working? Are you thinking it could be improved in the next go around if we had some positive ideas?
Well, I do think that, first of all, I do think it's working, and I think it's beneficial to all of us. But it does need some tweaks. There's no question about that. And certainly we've been talking about that in Congress as well. Look, we have a very competitive region, economically speaking. When you talk about North America, i.e., Mexico, United States, and Canada, together we contain about 6.5% of the population, but we generate about 27% of the world's GDP. And that's important. And just looking at the United States and Canada alone, we share a $1 trillion trade and investment relationship, and that's important. I think everyone in Congress understands the importance here and understands that we need something. But as I say, there are some things that we probably do need to tweak and some things that we'll look at as well. But the American jobs that are dependent and that are a result of this relationship are extremely important to us. So we need to remember that.
Absolutely. And as a follow-up, I know energy is a really big part of our bilateral relationships. And since you're on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, how do you view sort of our coordination on energy policies? There's been a lot of talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and what that did in terms of industrial policy. And increasingly, we're finding ourselves importing Canadian hydroelectricity and becoming more interconnected. Are you seeing us moving in a good direction, or do you have some areas of concern in our energy trade relationship?
I think we're moving in a good direction. There's always room for improvement. There's no question about that. But at the same time, if you look, you see that we've got between the United States and Canada, we have the world's largest market-based energy trading relationship. I mean, the U.S. imports 40% of its crude oil from Canada, nearly 5 million barrels of oil every day. 5 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum cross the U.S.-Canada border. That's significant, and we need to always remember that. So we're interconnected, and you mentioned the power grid, and that's very important. Having redundancy, having reliability is very important. I can remember going back to my trip to Montreal last summer, how impressed I was with the hydroelectric power and the fact that they were providing in Montreal power to New York State. That's the kind of relationship we need.
Absolutely. And in thinking about energy, and you touched on quite a few things, one of the things I want to touch on is critical minerals. Obviously, your subcommittee is very active on the topic, and it's also something that really comes up in every U.S.-Canada conversation. Great opportunities to collaborate and move forward and sort of really focus on friendshoring or nearshoring. But it seems that there's been a lot of talk and not as much forward momentum. And I think, I would love to hear what your thoughts are that could sort of unlock accelerating the progress here.
Well, as you heard in the introduction, I do have the honor of chairing the Environment, Manufacturing and Critical Materials Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce. And as you heard, the number one priority, beat China.
Yep.
Beat China. And that's got to be done not only through more mining and processing here in America, but as you mentioned, friendshoring and making sure that our allies are doing it as well. We need each other, and we need each other to make sure that we're less dependent on these adversarial countries who will manipulate this and use it for their own gain. That's why it's so vitally important. Listen, we all know Canada's rich in critical minerals, and that's important. That's important for us here in America. And one of the things that bothers a lot of our members, and should bother a lot of them, is are two things. First of all, the unfair labor that's being used in other countries, but secondly, the environmental impact. That they're not paying any attention to the environmental impact in China. They just do what they have to do to process these minerals, and then when it becomes contaminated, they just pack it up and go somewhere else. Well, we've got the best environmental regulations in the world in the United States and in Canada, and that's why we need to be doing it. That's another reason why we need to be doing it here.
Yep, absolutely.
Congressman, in the intro, I mentioned that you were a pharmacist, which means in a lot of ways you're a small business owner. And you've done that for 30 years. Can you talk a little bit about healthcare and the perspective as a small business owner on how important healthcare is to our small and medium-sized enterprises?
Well, it is extremely important. And that's one of the things that we have been focusing on here in Congress, not only in the Energy and Commerce Committee, because remember, the Energy and Commerce Committee is where the Healthcare Subcommittee is. And that's why I wanted to be on the Energy and Commerce Committee, to be quite honest with you, because healthcare is my focus. But I also serve on the Budget Committee. And on the Budget Committee, we've been looking at this consolidation that is happening in healthcare and the impact that it's having on healthcare here in America. When it comes down to it, all of us want the same thing. We want accessible, affordable, quality healthcare. And I think our two countries, Canada and America, have both been successful in delivering that. I tell people all the time, we've got the greatest healthcare system in the world right here in the United States of America. If you're sick, you don't want to be anywhere else besides right here. And that's very important. But we need each other. We need each other when it comes to healthcare delivery, when it comes to pharmaceuticals. We need all of that. So that's the kind of cooperation that we need between allied countries like Canada and the United States.
Absolutely. And in that regard, I remember, and you might not have seen it in Georgia, I remember how many people during the COVID pandemic were worried about border closures because small towns on the border needed each other to provide just basic services. And, they relied on each other for MRI machines. The U.S. has more of those than Canada does, things like that. Do you see some future for us to become more mutually reliant on each other's healthcare strengths, our research, and some of the other great things that we've been able to do here in North America?
Absolutely. And thank you for mentioning research, because that is vitally important. Research and development. And look, I practiced pharmacy for over 40 years. I saw nothing short of miracles as a result of research and development. Both of our countries need to continue investing in research and development, particularly when it comes to healthcare procedures, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, all of that we need to be focusing on. Healthcare and pharmaceutical independence is important to our national security as well. When we become dependent on other countries for active pharmaceutical ingredients that are used to manufacture our drugs, then we got a problem.
One of the things that I wanted to ask about from a nonpartisan, bipartisan lens, there's obviously an election coming up, and it tends to bring a lot of topics to the surface. And one of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about is how can we make sure that we're protecting and sort of preserving this North American relationship as all of the things start bubbling to the surface. So what do you think?
Well, I do think it's important that we do that. Look, we've got a lot of challenges, no question about that. This next election, it's kind of trite because you always hear the same thing over and over. Oh, this is the most important election of my lifetime. But I do believe that this next election is the most important election of my lifetime. And that's why it's so vitally important. And it really is about policies. And we've been talking about policy. We talked about NAFTA, which was before we had USMCA. And that's important as well. So all of those things are very, very important. And that's why, I say all the time, elections have consequences because policies have consequences.
Absolutely. And Congressman, Canada is going to have an election next year. So we're in a 2-year period where we're going to have to be kind of trying to keep the politics, which are important in democracy, separate from doing the right thing for ordinary citizens, trying to keep the policy mechanisms we have going. Your state's always been an important one in the United States. Georgia is one of those states that people turn to as a kind of a bellwether. What's your feeling? Are people tired of the partisan polarization in your community, or perhaps, are they enjoying it at some level and just hoping we can get the important work done?
Well, I don't know how many people are enjoying it. I suspect there are those out there who do enjoy the chaos and who enjoy, the theatrics, if you will. But people do want to see results. If you were to ask me what are the big issues that are before us in this next election, I would have to say that border security is one. Inflation, our economy, that's another one. Those two would be at the top of the list. And then, other things are important as well. National security and the world stage. We all know what's going on in the world right now, and it's very concerning to a lot of people.
Exactly. And one of the things we always say is neighbors really do matter. And aren't we fortunate to have such a great ally and our closest, trading partner with such great neighbors?
Absolutely.
But Congressman, Canada's not, it doesn't look like it's as bad as it's been in the past, but last year was really bad. But Canada's starting to see the early wildfire season kicking off. And last year was just historic. I know Georgia's also, a big forestry state. How do we manage wildfires better? I know there's a lot of cooperation between Canada and the U.S. in terms of water bombers and other equipment, but can we do more on the research and science side to just some forest fires are natural, but what can we do to kind of address these, the forest management in a cooperative way, learn from each other if it's possible?
Well, it is possible to learn from each other. And, prevention is extremely important. Educating people about the importance of being careful out. We enjoy our environment so much. Camping and just enjoying the outdoors is so important for us in Georgia, for us in the United States and in Canada. But we need to be very careful and understand that some of it's beyond our control, lightning strikes or whatever. But the preparation and what I refer to as the well care of our forest by making sure that we're being smart and having controlled burns where we need to have controlled burns before it becomes a problem. All of those things are things that we can learn from each other and share with each other. I can remember when I was actually in Canada, in Montreal last year, that we had some forest fires in Canada, and that we were feeling the impact, that is the smoke in the air in the United States.
Absolutely. Well, I know that you are a very busy man, and we really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. You're a wonderful ally. I really enjoyed traveling with you, so I guess we'll just have to go back to Canada again.
There you go.
Hey, take me with you next time.
Okay. Thank you so much, Congressman. It's always great to see you.
Good to see y'all.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you, sir.
This podcast is brought to you by the Canadian American Business Council and the Wilson Center. If you like this episode, help others find our show and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.